Welcome to The Interop. Today my guest is Anthony. He's a core contributor at XION. They're a generalized abstraction layer 1. In today's conversation, we'll discuss XION's origin story and why they burnt a Banksy. We'll talk about barriers to crypto adoption and how their meta accounts is making it easier for new users to onboard. We'll discuss how XION enables signature abstraction and fee grants for applications. We'll talk about their unique approach to offsetting inflation and why they're so bullish on the Cosmos stack. I'm also dying to find out why he thinks no one gives a shit about crypto. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to get notified when new episodes drop every week. Remember, none of what we discuss here on The Interop is investment advice, and if you enjoy this content, please consider staking with us. We're validating on Evmos, Quicksilver, Osmosis, and Juno. Just look for Interop in the active set. My guest, Anthony, is coming up right here on The Interop. I'm here with Anthony, core contributor at XION. Hey, Anthony, thanks for joining me.
What's going on, Seb? How you doing?
Good, yeah. First podcast of the year. Thanks for coming through on this.
Of course. Very short notice, too. You're like, hey, you want to do this tomorrow? I'm like, honestly, yeah, let's do it.
That's usually how things happen.
Yeah.
I'll wake up on Wednesday and be like, I got to do a podcast tomorrow on Thursday because I usually release by the end of the week, and then I'll just reach out to a bunch of people, and it always works out, and it's been working out this way for years.
Yeah.
So,
and why stop it if it's working?
Yeah, exactly. I also host this other podcast called Epicenter. We've been doing it for 10 years, and for the last 10 years, we were just constantly trying to keep up, and we'll get 3 or 4 weeks ahead, and we're like, oh, we're good. We're 3 or 4 weeks ahead, and then something happens.
And then you wake up on a Tuesday and I got to post.
Exactly, and there's nothing, and then you just start calling all your friends. But anyways, that's not what we're here to talk about. So we are here to discuss Burnt XION, which was kind of off my radar. I hadn't really heard of this project until Zdedex from Stake Lab mentioned it and put us in touch, and I was like, what is this? What's this project with 170,000 followers on Twitter and just as many people on Discord that I've never heard of, and started looking into it, and so yeah, I wanted to kind of deep dive here today and understand what it is you're building. But before that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the origin story.
Yep.
Why did you burn a Banksy?
It's a good origin story, though, right? So this is almost 3 years ago now. We, as you mentioned, right, we bought a Banksy art piece. For those who don't know, we bought a Banksy art piece for $90,000, and we lit it on fire. And we sold it for $400,000 as an NFT on OpenSea. The reason we did this, right, and this is back in the day, right? The only real NFTs CryptoKitties and CryptoPunks. That was kind of it. This is before Beeple, before really a lot of things. But I love them. I love my CryptoKitties. And I think as it kind of came to the vision of NFTs, I think we definitely saw it very early on, which was, this digital ownership of digital art, which could never really be done before on the cesspool that is the internet. But I was always getting shit for it. I hope I can curse on this podcast. I was getting a lot of shit for it. Was just this isn't real art. It's still what you hear today, but it's this isn't real art. If it's not on my wall, if I can't touch it, if I can't see it, where's the value in it? So I'm like, okay, let me take something that has value, sold at a Sotheby's auction, right? People know the word Banksy. And, even the art piece called Morons was making fun of Sotheby's auctions and people buying art. So I said, let's light it on fire, right? Obviously, you got to do something cool. And see if the value holds if we sell it as an NFT. And, from my perspective, we didn't even think we'd make any money on this. We thought $10,000, we bought it for $90,000. We were thinking $10,000 was what we were going to get for this. Just because that was the price of NFTs at that point. The highest NFT ever sold was, I think it was $100,000, which is unheard of. And it worked, right? I mean, I think a lot of us was just trying to, and you'll kind of see this as a consistent theme, which is taking this bridge between retail and crypto, right? And saying, we know this works in crypto because we've seen it in this micro environment, but, and I like to piss people off too. It's pretty fun. So I like to do these kind of stunts in these big ways to make these kind of points known. So we burned it to prove a point, and we proved that point.
Yeah, and I mean this was like during NFT summer, like I guess
Before.
Before. Okay.
This was before.
And so then you guys built this NFT platform on Solana, like building some of the early NFT standards there. What came of that? Like what did you achieve there, and kind of what came of that project?
Yeah, and I think we'll get into this more when we start talking about XION, but a lot of the logic was it was miserable for us to do the NFT. Right, like we had to, I've been in crypto for quite some time, and there's three of us, two of them were from Injective, and none of us really knew how to mint an NFT. It was just not something that we really did, and so we had to work with someone else who helped us mint an NFT, and it was, this whole promise of, let's democratize ownership, but if not everyone can access it, then is it really kind of democratizing ownership, right? And we wanted it to be like, hey, everyone can be an artist, everyone can do this, we can be discovered globally, and really kind of fulfill those promises of crypto. But what we kind of saw was this infrastructure that was slow, expensive, really hard to operate in, and we wanted at that point to make a very specific version of it, right, which was the marketplace, right? Decentralized marketplace. People couldn't get front run. It was cheaper, right? It was Solana at the time. It was faster, as one of our bids kind of effectively got front run on the Banksy auction. And I think as we kind of migrated from there and we built some of the early standards there, like the first collection standard, et cetera, we still were working with people like Afrojack and some pretty big names of trying to get a lot of NFTs on the platform. But the process of doing so is still, you have to go to Coinbase, you have to get a Phantom wallet. I'm sure I don't have to really tell you why crypto experience is just so miserable, right? And we'll, of course, get into that because that's effectively what we needed to solve at XION, right? And the journey to XION started, I would say, I think it was June 2022, was really when we first really broke ground with the SDK, right? And we said, we need to hit this from the ground level. As I mentioned, like, no one gives a shit about crypto, right? And I think we can kind of go into this a lot more, but we really wanted to build this blockchain for consumer applications with the underlying thesis that no one should care about crypto, but we still need to provide the benefits that crypto promises.
I'd like to maybe dig
There was a lot there.
bit.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, but like you said that like no, you think that nobody gives a shit about crypto, and to some extent I agree. I think nobody should give a shit about crypto infrastructure in the same way that nobody should give a shit about AWS or
exactly
any other sort of like technology unless they're building on it. But it seems that a lot of people do care about cryptocurrencies and do hold cryptocurrencies, right? I think there was I saw something recently that says that like something like 500 million or close to 500 million people hold crypto in one way or another.
Yeah.
And when we say that we're still early, I think that that's the best indicator of how early we are, because that's about how many people were on the internet in like the late 90s around the world. Mm-hmm. And things sort of picked up from there. And it wasn't actually until like the iPhone that we had sort of like half of the world's population on the internet. Yeah. And that was 10 years later. So, But
I mean, I do have an issue with that. I do, and I'll pick on that point a little bit. But to be on the internet required a serious investment in infrastructure, right? Like, it was really hard to be an early internet user. Right now, people have computers. They have all the tools that are necessary, and we're mimicking the adoption curves of internet. I don't see that actually as a positive. I genuinely see that as a negative, especially as, narratives like AI surpass us and narratives like VR surpass us. And obviously they've been around for longer, but it's not for a lack of tooling, right? Like, why is VR taking off when you require even more investment than crypto?
I mean, I think the answer there lies in just the importance and the influence of money. I think, this has been obvious to me since I first started getting interested in Bitcoin like 10 years ago, is that this was going to take a long time because crypto fundamentally is a political is a political idea, more so than the spread of information using the internet, or like the ability to, I mean, AI is fairly political, but like VR and metaverse, is just like another distraction.
Not a lot of politics there. It's entertainment. It's gaming, right? It's gaming at the end of the day.
Exactly. And I think like money and finance is highly political, and so that's why I think it's harder for crypto to like crypto has a whole lot more barriers that it has to break down, whether you know whether ideological barriers that like the sort of ideas that like the people hold about crypto. I think in your white paper you said that like you surveyed people and like most people still think that crypto is a scam. But you know, in the early '90s, like in the early 2000s, a lot of people still thought the internet was stupid, right?
Yeah,
like there's tons of articles that about like people writing about how the internet was
how it'll never be a thing. Yeah, of course. There's too much information.
Yeah, correct. So I mean, this is like this is a recurring thing. You know, I mean, it goes back to the printing press when people thought that like people having books was a bad idea. So I think I'm pretty. I guess I'm not so worried about the adoption curve. Obviously, it'd be better if it was if there was more adoption. But I think the adoption curve is like on track.
Okay.
I don't know.
It's a good point. Yeah, I mean, it's
podcast. Feel free to argue otherwise. Yeah.
No, I mean, listen. I think we're both arguing for the same thing. I'm saying it should be faster. You're saying it should be faster, right? And I think anyone in crypto is not going to say, you know what, actually, we're good having 1% of the population. I don't think anyone here wants that, right? And you know, I come to the table with a set of beliefs that, you know, and I think it's funny because crypto as a whole was meant to eliminate the need for trust, yet it became very quickly one of the most untrusted industries, which, I mean, to me is hilarious, right? But you get something that's, you know, you're redefining ownership, right? And I think it's a sect of the internet, naturally, right? Where you have so much information in this kind of postmodernism, like, argument of there's too much information, how do I know what's real? I think crypto thrives. You know, you've never been able to do scarcity on the internet, which is why the whole right-click save is such a meme. You know, but it's not going to be like killing the Netflixes or the Spotifys. It's going to be this kind of upgraded or completely new thing, which is so exciting.
I agree there. So what is XION and who are you building it for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that XION takes on the narrative of a couple things. On a very base layer, and if you were to ask me directly, it is an L1 for consumer applications. You know, we can get into the word of generalized abstraction, which is more technical, right, and speaks to that more technical, you know, kind of audience. But when we talk about an L1 for consumer applications, right, what we really mean is the current tools right now are really tailored towards the crypto native. It's really tailored towards DeFi. It's really tailored towards finance. And, you know, this group that's been in here and this, call it an echo chamber, right, where you have these extremely high barriers to entry, both, you know, physical and kind of a knowledge barrier to entry, where we require people to click on the right links, download the right extensions, and learn about this, and, you know, wait 5 days, enter your social security number on Coinbase. And there's a lot of expectations, right? But, you know, it's also more incentivized by the industry to kind of be siloed in a way, because, you know, a lot of protocols' business model is effectively, you know, not rugging retail, but bringing new money in so that people can cash out, right? And that's a pyramid scheme at the end of the day.
Yeah. So when you say building, like you're building a layer one for consumer applications, you know, I think there's a lot of other protocols that would have a similar mission. You know, I think Saga, Say, Immutable, Injective, like all of these chains and some others, you know, were built around this idea that we need to make applications easier to use, faster, with better response times, like better UX around wallets.
Yeah.
And, you know, also like Osmosis, I think, you know, even though it is quite DeFi oriented, is like super focused on UX and improving the experience.
Yeah.
How is XION different from any of those?
Yeah. I mean, I'll think about the names you mentioned, right? Like Injective is the blockchain for finance. Say is the blockchain for trading. You know, Saga is, I don't know their tagline, but I believe they're like roll-up of roll-ups is what I always called them, or a bunch of side chains. You know, but I love them. We were part of the one of the programs. I forget what it was called. You know, and then Immutable Gaming, right? And I think everyone's going to have their niche. And I think this is something that we learned early on in Solana, was when we were competing with DeFi products, you know, there's different things that be needed for a generalist blockchain. And I think when we look at something like Cosmos, you see where this app chain / industry chain specific narrative comes in, where when we talk about consumer applications, a lot of it is, we we don't want people to give a shit about DeFi. We want to make the next Spotify, but make it just about the music. We don't believe people should care about that. And when you had mentioned it earlier, which is making a better UX for wallets. We kind of go into this when we start talking about what we consider meta accounts, which is we don't really want EOAs, right? We want smart contract accounts, and we want, what we call it is, we enshrine our UX opinions on the protocol level, right? Which is rather than something like a 4337, which is kind of this social consensus layer, or this kind of social consensus, we have it on the protocol level, which allows us to do a lot of interesting aspects to it, right? Rather than kind of really fragmenting the industry and making it extremely difficult. We just make it extremely easy for someone who wants to build. I love music, but so I'm going to keep giving music examples because, but like the next SoundCloud, right? And so that they can focus on the product.
Interesting. So, there's a lot of different ways that we could sort of get into this, but let's maybe start with generalized abstraction, because this is a topic that it's obviously like in your tagline and sort of everywhere. You guys wrote a paper about it, and so what is generalized abstraction, and how does that relate to XION?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not necessarily a play on words, but it's definitely kind of comes from the idea of account abstraction, right? And I think when we were having these conversations about abstraction, I think it was what people kind of understood as this universal, hey, let's make sure that users can use this without really needing to know everything, right? And so whether it's a concept of the tokens that you buy underlying, whether it's the concept of the chain you're on, whether it's the concept of your account, of your funds, it should feel like a Web2 experience. And we believe that our main goal is to create a Web2 experience on every single application that's deploying on XION. And the way that we do that is by creating this generalized abstraction layer to kind of make this separation between this product and, let's say, like execution environment, right?
Is XION, I think this is where I need to get a better grip.
And it's hard because of how much jargon there is in the industry of and predisposition of what an L1 is, or a layer is, or a blockchain is. So I think it's easiest to understand it as an L1, but it's a kind of collaborative L1 via the abstracted interoperability. I think the main goal of it is to look like the App Store, right? Whether you're on XION, whether you're on Injective, whether you're on Avalanche, whether you're on Optimism, it shouldn't matter, right? And I think we're getting to a place, especially when we can have a smart contract address on every single chain, we can then effectively bridge or communicate via general message passaging, or however, I think we cite XLS, Hyperlane, and IBC for how we kind of do this, but, taking the concept of interchain accounts and then bringing that, everywhere via, let's say, Landslide or something like that, you kind of get this interesting aspect where, hey, the chain doesn't matter, everything for us, we had a pretty big partnership with Circle, is going to be dollar denominated, right? And we kind of talk about our parameterized fee layer, which allows you to not only use USDC, but allows you to use any token you want on any chain, which makes it significantly easier for us to, operate on every chain. And the reason we have it as kind of this own independent layer is to, obviously we have the validators incentivizing security and ensuring that everything is kind of up to snuff, if that makes sense.
Okay, so when a user is interacting, well, I guess, first and foremost, XION is a developer product, right?
Yes.
It is for developers to build applications.
Correct.
Right? So how does XION integrate with other chains? Does XION sort of, as a developer, am I building on XION and then XION is somehow deploying or interacting with other chains, or is it sort of like the other way around? What's the kind of modular, how does that look in the modular stack?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And there's definitely a component of time in that, right? And I think to answer the grand vision and to answer what we're doing in 2 months is going to be very different, right? We obviously are running a testnet right now. Kind of just closed the testnet, opening up a new one soon, though. Deploying on XION, you kind of get all these aspects of, generalized abstraction. We're working very closely with the Injective team to try to do that for something like Talus or Mito, to be able to use a XION account on Mito. And then as I mentioned with Landslide, it's a lot of kind of ICA, a lot of really reliance on ICA to have these mirroring accounts on every chain. And so I wouldn't think about it as deploy on Zion and get deployed everywhere. It's the Zion user experience is pretty chain agnostic, right? We are collaborative with Injective, we want to be collaborative with Optimism, we want to be collaborative with AVAX, because I think, especially as an L1 and where we are in the industry, it doesn't benefit anyone to be competitive. A user on Solana shouldn't not be a user on Avalanche. And I think this is one of those fundamental understandings that we learned very early on, which was, when we call it abstracted interoperability. And a lot of that is it's marketing, right? The abstracted interoperability is marketing. What we really want to say is, we want to create this environment where the products are the thing that thrive, and we want to, kind of not hide, but in the back end, when I say people don't give a shit about crypto, the process of moving to another chain, swapping your funds, getting a new denominated token that's also extremely volatile, if we really want to get retail on board, they're not going to do that, right? It's still ridiculous as it is today to kind of, oh, here's a new L1, let me bring it over to Scroll and do X, Y, and Z, and then I'll have to go bridge that over to Optimism and change that to Optimism. It's terrible. And so when we talk about it, it's pretty umbrella-y of a term, and I think there's going to be a lot of writing and a lot of kind of conversations that come out of it, but I do think that we are stunted by the traditional definitions of an L1.
I was thinking about this in the context of different application environments, whether this could work for applications on Ethereum or some other generalized smart contract platform.
Yep.
Could also work with applications built as rollups.
Yes.
And applications built as app chains. In the context of app chains, though, so let's say Osmosis or DYDX, right? They have a high level of sovereignty, and I think they are building an application that has a high degree of vertical integration and want to keep their users on their application. And in the case of Osmosis, they're building also account abstraction to make it easier for people to onboard, etc. Mm-hmm. So is there a benefit for applications like those that have such high control over the entire stack that can build things like generalized sort of account abstraction and fee grants and things of that nature built into their chain? Is there an advantage for them to use Zion as well?
Yeah, we're not taking over their chain, right? And I think that's why we call it, this kind of abstraction layer, right? And why we're going to be collaborative with every chain is because now, rather than saying, oh, I have 10 users on this chain, 10 users on this chain, and on 10 different chains, you make that all collaborative. Now you have 100 universal users on 10 different products, right? And so it's a rising tides will bring all boats, up approach, rather than, and that's, I think, a big issue that we kind of have, which is, we're competitive, right? The crypto industry, especially the L1 industry, is extremely cutthroat and it's competitive. A user on DYDX is siloed. They don't want to go to Osmosis. DYDX wouldn't want you to go to Osmosis. Maybe they would. I don't want to put words in their mouth. But it would be much better if we had everyone just being able to use the products as they're kind of designed for. And we're not trying to take over their stack. We're just trying to create this layer kind of on top that allows for everything to be connected.
So
to add to that, the transactions and everything would still happen on their chain, but they would be mimicked on the Zion chain.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the different components of this generalized abstraction. So there's the meta accounts, there's a signature abstraction, you have this parameterized fee layer, and this abstracted interoperability. These are all kind of very abstract terms, I think. So let's maybe talk about one each individually, starting with maybe the most obvious, which is the meta accounts, or I guess you could sort of equate them to some kind of account abstraction. How does that work?
Yeah, loaded question. But yeah, so I think when we talk about meta accounts, there's history behind that kind of connotation to it, right? Which is, I think you get this kind of idea of account abstraction in 4337, which is, hey, let's make an easier wallet, right? Let's make this wallet with these bundlers, right, etc. When we have it on the protocol level, right, and we have everything that we've kind of been working on, meta accounts is more of an application of what we've built, right? And so when we say, since everything's a smart contract to cut on the protocol, we get the ability to sign in with really whatever you want, right? There's no private public key anymore. And I think that concept is what I'm going to harp on a lot when I talk about a meta account. right? So since we don't have a private public key anymore, right, we effectively just have a public key that needs to be authenticated. We can use any authentication method we want, which means that we can use, a Solana wallet, we can use an Ethereum wallet, we can use a Kepler, we can use Face ID, we can use single sign-on, Gmail, socials, whatever. Any public, any encryption works, right? And so that's kind of one of these things. And I think we talk about mobile as well, right? And a lot of decisions in crypto are based on these legacy decisions that have been created for us, right? The reason a wallet exists is because you needed someplace to store the private key, right? And you're not going to just store it in the browser. You need someone to store it for you, right? So then comes MetaMask. And then comes this entire protocol design around this concept of wallets, which inherently is clunky. You lose a mnemonic, you're done, right? You're compromised once, you're done. You don't really get this security aspect. You don't, and there's a lot, I of course don't really have to kind of say too much on that, but the ability to then have everything as a meta account and have just complete public key encryption, right, it allows for us to do a lot of insane things, right? And as I kind of mentioned, with one of those things kind of being what looks like account abstraction, but being able to do key rotation, really getting into the advanced nitty-gritty of being able to do like even weighted or being able to, and I think the way that we're working on it with Abstraction 2.0 is using Auth to provide kind of security grants, right? So you have this kind of, you have this meta account, and then say I want to go to use this application, I can give an Auth grant to then spend only up to $50 on the accounts that on the contracts that are permissioned, and you get this new layer of security that kind of also works with that. And you've obviously been around in the Cosmos space a lot, and you've heard Auth being kind of mentioned in this connotation. And I think there's very few podcasts where I can kind of go into the nitty gritty on why we're excited about what we call Abstraction 2.0. It's a NPM library, but a lot of that kind of comes over to this Auth thing that we've done to be able to have these sub accounts per each application that you're on that link to the meta account and have this security permission. But at the end of the day, it just feels like you're dealing with products.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like Auth works when you're dealing with Cosmos chains. It's when you get into Solana or Ethereum or any other sort of
and a lot of that
blockchain.
Differs, right? Like we cite Hyperlane. I think there's going to be different methods that we do. I think for us, we're not, obviously right now we're Cosmos, right? And IBC and ICA is already there, and it's so incredible. And it's frankly underused. That should have been my hot take, because I genuinely think that it's the killer thing of Cosmos. That is just terrifically underused, or underutilized, or under talked about. But yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you is with this Abstraction 2.0, if we don't need a place to store the private key anymore, i.e. a wallet, and we can construct these kind of multi-factor authentication, perhaps also, and this is something that Osmosis wants to do, right? It's like having thresholds. So if you're sending like under a certain amount, you can sign in with your Gmail, but if you're sending more, you're going to have a second factor, perhaps of a passkey or something like that. At this, when you get it to this level of account abstraction and the private key no longer exists, do we need a wallet anymore? Like, can we just log it in the browser and have everything just happen?
So that's where you get into Auth. And so this is actually funny, because we realized this with Abstraction 1.0, needing Abstraction 2.0. On Osmosis, that works when you're Osmosis, and you know that you're not going to be a malicious application. When you're building out an ecosystem and you effectively give free reign to someone because you don't need a wallet anymore, that can get really bad really, really quickly, right? And so when we talk about this kind of security threshold of Auth, yes, there's like this multi-factor authentication of like Osmosis, but it's still Osmosis, right? What's interesting kind of about that, right, is when you say that there's no wallet, what you need to understand is that there's no real signing anymore, right? Is because now it's like Signal, right? Where you log into Signal, you verify your session, and then you could send a bunch of messages as you want, right? Since there's no private key, you don't really need to sign anything anymore, which is both really cool, but also pretty scary if it's in the wrong hands. And so when you talk about these kind of grants, right, it's yes, we want to ensure that this session is valid. We want to ensure that you can only get up to this much, interact with these contracts that are, maybe governance approved. But a lot of that does come into, yes, our aspect of still wanting to bring retail on, but understanding that we still need to be trustless and decentralized.
Okay, I hadn't considered that. Yeah, basically, if you give access to the browser or like some application in the browser, that application, once it has access, it can just like
whatever it wants,
do whatever it wants.
Yep.
And yeah, okay. Or potentially even like you could have some exploit that is like
phishing,
has control over your DOM and would be able to then like make transactions on your behalf. And so so in this case, that's where auth comes into play, is that auth sits between the user and the application. So you can set all these parameters within auth.
Yep, it's like a sub account, and you're not connected to the entire thing, right? If you're on a social media or a social network, right, there's no reason for you to be sending $50,000 to a wallet address. The approvals you're going to give are going to be like a post, comment on something, like don't expose your entire wallet balance.
Yeah, and so like I think one of the challenges here with this kind of, with any sort of new account system, is that legacy accounts are difficult to onboard. So like I use a ledger. I'd love to move all of my DeFi positions onto something that's easier to use and yet secure, but
so kinda. There's also what we want and what we don't want, right? I'm not promoting anyone to get off of their ledger. Like that's not what we want. I think I'm still keeping a ledger. Right. Yeah,
but like think about like a long-term vision, right? If you're like 10 years from now, like we have account abstraction that is well constructed enough where you can have hardware, you can have hardware that's maybe like in a phone or something like that that's also securing a device, and maybe like multiple factor layers of multi-factor authentication for different types of and then like you want to onboard folks that already have sort of like very complex portfolios that are on EOAs. What's the path to taking those and migrating them to something like this? So
there's two kind of things to that. One of them, we're really bad because we just do way too many fucking puns at this company, where we have like, I don't know if you've seen XION, which is the NPM library, but it's abstraction spelled XION at the end, right? And then you realize that anything that ends in like ON or ION can then just be EONed or whatever. We have what we call succession or whatever. It's annoying, I know. Don't blame me, blame Ash. But what we still require, there's going to be times where you still require off-chain signing, right? And, a lot of this kind of comes into play, which is like, hey, I exist, I am this wallet, right? And as I had mentioned, right, since it's a public key, we can use any encryption method, right? Which means I can still sign with my MetaMask. I can still sign with, a YubiKey or something like that, right? And being able to kind of transfer that, you can still bridge, right? And I think that's the difficulty in what we're kind of building is, yes, we're building for the Web 2, but we're also building for the Web 3 because at the end of the day, that's where everything starts, right? You can't, Rome wasn't built in a day. And, being able to transfer is very easy. It's just a bridge, right? I'll call Georgios from Axela right now and be like, but it's being able to then bring that into this kind of secure method in a way that both resonates with Web 2 and Web 3, right? And so when I say I don't want anyone to move off of a hardware wallet, I'm still a huge proponent of not your keys, not your wallet, right? And I want to create an environment, I think the whole team wants to create an environment where, if you still want to operate with your Ethereum, right? If you still want to operate with your Solana, you can, right? Like we're not saying you can't. I think a lot of that kind of needs to be, and a lot of that is like it's design, right? Which is having advanced settings, right? Maybe not necessarily saying this is the correct approach, but saying, hey, we think you should use your email. Do you have a Kepler? Sure. Here you go, right? And I think that's really important about being this kind of environment that we want to create is it's not just for Web 2. It's this nice bridge in a way.
So let's talk a little bit about signature abstraction and how that relates to.
This is perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, account abstraction.
Yeah. Right. So as we kind of mentioned, right, the signatures don't matter, right, anymore. We don't need a signature. We don't need to sign transactions. We do need to validate a session, right? But that means we can use any encryption curve that we want, right? Whether that's, we can, and then combine them together, right? And I think you look at like what multi-factor authentication will look like on this. We'd love for people to use their email to create an account, but then back it up with a MetaMask, right? Or join XION with their MetaMask and then use their email for account recovery, right? Do they want to switch out a key? Great, here's another one. We can have key rotation on that. That key can be, and we're going to have, right, and then that goes the other way around, right, which is being able to use those keys to then sign transactions on other accounts, or to mimic the transactions on other accounts. And I think what we talk about with signature abstraction, it's a cute marketing word, right? But at the end of the day, most of these things are, right? It's signature abstraction. It's device abstraction. But the only thing that really, at the end of the day, this commonality between all of them is that people don't give a shit. But people shouldn't have to know what signature curve they're using, right? Or understand why K1 versus R1 curve, right? I think we're at a point of encryption where people don't even know, right? But also we need to ensure that we're future proofing for the next generation of encryption services that kind of come out there, right? And so as we talk about the R1 or K1 curve, that could be obsolete in 15 years, right? And to be able to run an entire network off of something that could be obsolete, we need a way to then kind of prevent that and effectively future-proof ourselves for, maybe another chain comes live that uses a completely different signature curve or some other method of encryption. We need to be ready for that.
Okay, so if I summarize here, like an application that leverages like XION abstraction, like a user would send a message to XION to do some action, and then XION has the ability to sign on with any sort of curve.
Yep.
That's sort of the way I understand it. Like, so basically you can like sign with the ECDSA
Well, XION's
curve
not signing technically, but you can sign with any curve to XION.
Okay, I see. Right. Okay, and then XION passes on that signature to the chain. Okay, got it. And how does this relate to like passkey technology?
Yeah, that's what we're really excited about, right? Because we can use Apple's Secure Enclave now, right? Which means that you can log in with your Face ID, you can log in with your Touch ID on Mac, right? Or your Google ID or something like that. And utilizing Apple or Google's Secure Enclave, is extremely cool. And so when we talk about passkey, we just want to make this as Web 2 as possible, right? Like imagine logging into your account just with your Face ID and you don't have to sign anything because you've already authenticated your session, right? And at the end of the day, like, we keep reverting back to this idea that we want to, like, we work so freaking hard just to mimic Web 2, right? And to provide applications that can mimic at Web 2 so that you don't, I think Immutable even quoted this of like there's a 95% fall off rate when users are prompted with a wallet, right? And let alone just even getting past that, right? And so being able to provide companies, products, people, the opportunity to build products that don't provide a 95% fall off rate is really what everything here is for.
Do you think that as we move towards as people move towards leveraging passkey to manage their entire digital security, does that give
Apple
too much power to Apple and Google? And one of the ways that we can, as users, retain sovereignty over, I mean, I guess like they can't. Well, I guess they don't have access to the keys because they're encrypted in the device, but they do have like the ability to censor, I suppose.
We also don't want your passkey to be your only means of authentication, because
I mean, I guess it's more like a general question about the use of passkey for, securing everything. One's like vault of passwords.
I mean, that's why Bitcoin used the K1 curve versus the R1 curve, right? Which is the kind of fear that it's already been encrypted, right? But this kind of fear of power, right? And that's where all this kind of comes from. So on a general basis, I absolutely agree with you, right? But I think on two kind of points to that. Number one being this kind of concept of key rotation, which is, this consideration of like multi-party computation is kind of interesting. But being able to not have this kind of single point of failure, a single point of exposure, is number one really really important to us. But then also I think it's like you're always going to find this trade-off of adoption versus, hey, does Apple have too much power, right? Or does Google have too much power? Because when we talk about us, and I know us, right? Like, we're very specific of like, yeah, Apple has too much power. It's what crypto's here for. But if we want to genuinely bring over the world, there's going to be some trade-offs in security for the people who maybe they don't care about security, right? But being able to then provide them like a multi-party or like a multiple key rotation system where they don't need to care is kind of what we approach, if that makes sense. It's the old bait and switch, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So what's this parameterized fee layer, and how can applications utilize that to abstract away fees?
So I mean, parameterized fee layer, we kind of go into this in a couple ways, and I think you nailed it as well, right? Which is, number one, people shouldn't ever. I don't think an end user should ever see a gas fee in their life. I don't think it's conducive, and especially when you have to buy like a native token. I think that is a huge barrier of entry for, number one, products, but number two, kind of L1s. And so we understand that there's an insane amount of friction that comes with gas. And so for us, that part was originally called gas abstraction, if you could follow the pattern there. But as it kind of relates to the parameterized fee layer, there's definitely more to it. And we work with fee abstraction is an interesting part of that, which is there's two types of transactions that we kind of imagine. The first one is paid transactions, right? Which is I'm buying something for $100, and everything is denominated ideally in dollars, right? I'm giving $100. Also, since it's denominated in dollars, that allows us to have credit card purchasing directly for those assets, right? Because you don't have to do this weird rigmarole of swapping, right? So buying USDC with that assets, buying credit card, using credit card, buying USDC, buying the asset with the credit card, and then say, hey, here's 99.99 goes to the person who sold it, and then the 0.1 then goes to the fee collector, right? And this is one of those things that we built, right? And so that those USDC fees then get swapped to the XION token so that they can be obviously counted against inflation. The second is what you've probably seen more, which is this kind of concept of fee sponsoring, which isn't as sexy, it's not as cool, but this is more for like the platform sends, etc. Things that don't really have a monetary value to it, but still need to kind of go across the finish line. But a lot of the fee layer kind of comes along, and we use, we work very closely with Osmosis for the fee abstraction kind of on that end, and there's a little bit of part of it about like how we calculate the TWAP to be able to pay the gas collector or the fee collector to then combat inflation. But at the end of the day, the whole reason that exists is so, starting with USDC, but then whether that be XION, whether it converts to XION, whether it converts to Solana and does a transaction over there, it creates this kind of, separation, this abstraction layer, between this kind of the product, the user, and then, what I call the people who need to be fed, right? Which are the validators, which is getting the transaction across the finish line and making sure that everything is accounted for.
Is this complementary to using skip lanes for fee abstraction?
I think we work with the same. I believe so. Unfortunately, I'm not as familiar with a skip lane. Can you give me a quick rundown?
Yeah, so basically, like Skip has this block SDK, and the block SDK allows you to construct your block, and they have this whole concept of lanes, where essentially you could say, okay, like the first 10% of the block or whatever is reserved for new addresses that have just like basically it's like their first transaction, and these transactions are going to be free, or I don't know, maybe like governance transactions are free, and you can sort of construct your block in this way and enforce certain parts of the block for certain types of transactions, and like new users using the protocol for the first time is like one of those use cases, I suppose.
My knowledge of that was that it was mainly for MEV protection. Is that a correct understanding?
It is for MEV protection, but there's also like you can also use it for this kind of use case, right? Where like a user that just received, say, like Atom on their Osmo account, and it's like a brand new address, and they don't have any Osmo to pay for fees, you could say, okay, this is a new address. We're going to give them like their first 5 transactions for free or something like that.
Like a fee grant. Yeah. Like you're saying like a fee grant for new addresses, right?
Yeah, or certain types of transactions could be free, and you would have those like sort of in a specific lane. Yeah.
Got it. I mean, I could see it being similar. I know we've had very similar conversations, and I like, Magma from Skip, and I love those guys. But, I think we're solving probably similar things when it comes to that because, you're right. It's a huge pain for a new user, and especially it's funny on Cosmos, an account doesn't get activated unless it has money in its wallet, right? And so this was a big problem we ran into probably like a year ago in testing. Before everything really kind of came to fruition, which was, it's like, oh my God, we have these people signing up, but they need to claim funds. We need to send them funds so that they can do a free action, right? And it's definitely an interesting concept. And I think lanes is an interesting way of kind of approaching it. And I think it's very MEV specific. But I do think that aspects like that kind of solve similar functions, which is, I think Near did it as well, which was like every new wallet got like $5 in Near. And it was to make that first transaction. Because that's the worst thing for a new wallet is, A, it's not activated, I can't do anything, even if it's free. But then B, I have to then, the process of doing that is really tough. And so, that's why I say it's probably on the other end of the transaction where it's not before TX, it's on after TX. I think we're solving the same things. The problems in crypto arise in very similar formats. And, the Skip team has always been extremely bright and extremely intelligent. And I think it's easy to understand these kind of problems and to be able to solve it. Especially, and then what I was saying about kind of the Skip lane specific part was it was very, very tailored to this MEV protection. And I think for us, a lot of it is more encompassing of, we talked about this a little bit, but it's like, hey, we don't think the Mint module works very well in the way that it is. And then, we think that fees should offset inflation as well. And then also we think that people aren't going to be using the XION token to be doing transactions. Like, I don't imagine a world where a lot of people are using XION to make transactions. Like, I want XION to be in the back end really, really badly, right? Like, I would rather you hold Solana and USDC in your wallet, and then you can use that, and then it would be converted to XION, right? So when I say we're solving it from different ends, right, like the before TX and after TX, like that's more what's going on in my mind, which is, like, don't think about it. Like, we're solving the same thing from a different endpoint and for different purposes.
So yeah, let's talk about the Mint module. You guys have written about this on your blog quite a bit, and like in the context of offsetting inflation and sort of maintaining a good ratio of staked to liquid staked tokens. Can you expand on this research and your thinking about what is the right way forward for XION?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is all, I'd love to call this part like Montes' kind of brainchild as it comes to it. But something that he brought up and something that we really noticed very quickly was that there is an immense amount of hyperinflation, right? You look into this and it's like, well, why, right? And APYs are fine, but why is the inflation so high? When you look at the kind of the calculations behind it, and you're saying, okay, we're doing the calculations for all tokens in existence, and then distributing that towards people who are staking, right? Why don't we just provide the same APY and to everyone that's staking? Like, wouldn't that theoretically make more sense? Wouldn't that be more sustainable? And wouldn't, like, it was funny because you always have these moments, especially in this industry, which is like, why the fuck did they decide to do it this way? Like, why is this the standard? And I think it was obviously kind of Montes taking a step back and hitting this first principles approach of saying, dude, I think this is fucking stupid. And so we rewrote the Mint module and a lot of parts of it to distribute staking for APY for stake tokens, right? And what this inherently means is, like, especially in the first couple of 12 months, I think we can promise a 15% inflation and then hit like a less than 1%. 15% APY and hit less than a 1% inflation, right? It starts kind of, if you have everything staked and you have everything unlocked, then it starts to look the same, right? Because if all the tokens are staked, then APY equals stake tokens in kind of any capacity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How does that work practically then? So can you give some examples of what what the inflation would be like given certain amount of stake, and what's the optimal kind of ratio there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you always, I think you always have this kind of optimal ratio of like, ideally you have 40 to 50%. I think is kind of what we normally see. Obviously, you want as much staked as possible, right? Like that's definitely incentivizing to be as staked as possible. What was what was the first part of your question?
Yeah, I mean, what's the? Can you give some examples there of like what that would look like in production? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you an example of what it won't look like. But it would be like the user wouldn't really know. You're effectively getting what you're promised, and the chain isn't suffering from it, right? Like, say you were to stake, say you were to stake, you're getting 50% APY no matter what on what you're staked, right? It doesn't matter. What matters is you look at the entire piece of the pie, and we're only effectively individually, giving that 15% to everyone that stakes, right? Not this kind of weird other way around, which is, oh, okay, this is theoretically what the staking rewards would be if everyone staked, but let's take that, let's take this, you have these two layers, right? Like, if you would imagine like this being the amount of tokens that are kind of minted because of the APY, but then this is the amount of tokens that are staked, you have this like thick layer of fat that's like, why are we inflating this if we don't need to? If the stakers are all getting rewarded, why do we have this thick layer of fat? And what do we do with it? We just give it to the other stakers, right? And so you get the same, you effectively get the same 15% APY, but everyone gets hurt in the end. And I think you looked at this like, I think at some point it didn't really matter. Like when you had like 100% of tokens being staked, the math is the exact same as doing the way that we're doing. But I think, to give you the example, right, like you saw some pretty, intense inflation rates and pretty like average APYs, right? And it was, you look at some of this and you look and you say, oh wow, that's just not sustainable, right? And I think there's an incentive to stake, and we need to provide security to the network, and we need to provide the incentive to stake. But also, why are we sinking the ship in the meantime, right? Like, how short-term vision are we looking here, where this is getting out of control?
I mean, so if I come back to sort of the crux of the issue here, the issue is that say we have a 15% APY on staking. So you stake your tokens, you get 15% APY on those tokens. But there's a 4% inflation rate, right? So like the effective APY that you're getting is not 15, it's 11, right?
Yes.
Because there's an inflation rate of 4.
Yes.
And so what you're saying is that rather than spreading that inflation as if all tokens were staked, that the inflation
Correct.
is effectively proportional to the amount of tokens that are actually being staked.
That is exactly correct.
Okay, got it. Okay, and so then, I mean, in that context, then like, wouldn't the incentive just be for everyone to stake and then just get liquid stake tokens, and then we would just be sort of back at the same, like you're just back in the same situation?
And I think you're probably back in the same situation, realistically. Like, I do think that happens I think that happens over time, and there's never going to be 100% of the tokens that are in circulation, just ever, right? And it's more of this fact of like, hey, why are we doing more? Like, why are we doing extra than we need to, right? Why don't we just do the amount that's correct instead of having this layer of fat? So, I think we can talk in hypothetical of like, oh, let's imagine 100% of people are staking, but I think you and I both like look at other projects, right? You look around the industry and you never have 100% staked, right? It's illogical to kind of assume that, and I think we see a lot of the times it's around 40 to 50% is staked, and I think there's going to be kind of some that's staked, there's going to be some that's probably used, but normally I believe what we see, like I think Injective sees like 40 to 50%, and I think that's where a lot of these like our assumptions are based off of, because you really rarely see close to 100% staked.
But yeah, of course, that's. But I was just thinking
unless
in theoretical.
And I think like another thing that also kind of screws projects over that we're trying to avoid is like, letting the community do the staking. Why is it the treasury shouldn't be staking if it's not unlocked, right? Like, you shouldn't be having the treasury making money when the community's getting screwed over, right? Like, it should be for securing the tokens that are available to the market. And I think that's where this calculation also makes an assumption, which is saying, we're going to be very true to the community, especially while we're getting the bootstrap to the network and everything's getting started. It's like the people who will be earning are going to be the people who are securing the network. It's not going to be this like kind of free for all per se, which we've seen time and time before.
So let's talk about the stack a little bit. So you guys are leveraging the Cosmos stack. Like, why did you choose to use Cosmos? And since you're coming from Solana, I guess I'd like to know why not build this on as a Solana roll up, or like build this with the Solana stack or any other stack. Like, why leverage Cosmos?
There's a few reasons. Number one, the time that we made this decision, right? Arbitrum optimism wasn't really a thing. Like 2022, they were coming out, they're fine. They weren't really a thing. Neither was the Solana roll-up. That wasn't really even an option. I think that the only ones that we could really make our own chain was like Polkadot, and Parity wasn't an investor to us, right? And I love the team a lot, but it was Cosmos and it was Polkadot or it was Polygon for our own chain. And number one, there was always the question of like, hey, why don't we just try to do this somewhere else? And the answer to that is like, grass is legitimately never greener on the other side. And I think we had a lot of scar tissues from what we'd built, and I love the Solana community to death, but when you're competing in a generalized environment and like the decisions are being made for DeFi or what's hot, right? Then you start to get these kind of scar tissue that formed, which is like, we're making this for the specific purpose so that we don't have to compete, right? Subnets were still iffy, right? Like, this was even before like Kravata went to a subnet and they realized, hey, this isn't as sustainable as we think, and made some really awesome changes to it. I think Cosmos was like, I always say Cosmos is the end game of like crypto. Like, I think Cosmos got the end game right, and I think I saw a tweet the other day that said it too, but it's like, if you took ETH and you took Cosmos, we're all effectively solving the same thing, but Cosmos solved the end game first and then went the other way. ETH started off with ETH and then roll up all the way to what Cosmos will effectively become. And so you got things like IBC, ICA. Also, we work out of the Injective office, so it's always been helpful to to kind of have them, as they're kind of my longtime friends. Additionally, a lot of the team came from Cosmos, just kind of happenstance. I think you get the independence of Cosmos to be as part of the community or as not part of the community as you want, and it's up to you, right? You can work with people, you cannot work with people. Obviously, it benefits everyone to work with people, but I think you have such an interesting community of like people who don't need to be there, like that you see with other generalized L1s, but the people want to be there, and I think that's a very key difference that is only really seen in the Cosmos community.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I agree on a lot of those points. I think that this idea that you can use the Cosmos stack and decide to work with people or associate with the brand as much as you want or not, in the case of chains like DYDX, for instance, or Say, right? Like, so they've sort of squarely gone in the direction of like, they want to build their own thing and not necessarily associate with the brand, but leverage the stack. And then other chains are going to be like super aligned with the branding and super aligned with the kind of like Cosmos ecosystem. And, I've talked about this many times on the podcast, but I see it as sort of similar to Linux in that perspective, where, all the devices that we use on a daily basis pretty much all use Linux as the Linux kernel, but none of them associate with the brand. Meanwhile, there's like tons of operating systems that do, right? And so that's the beauty of like building this sort of end game thing first, and then kind of going back and having people build cool stuff with it. So yeah, very, very cool. And so before we wrap up here, what's the current state of the project? And you mentioned earlier there was a testnet going on. When's the mainnet? When's the TGE? Yep. When airdrop? Yes. All the stuff people want to learn about.
Of course. So we finished our last testnet. Last testnet ended with 450,000 wallets. I think it was like 4 million transactions. And we have been upgrading later part of December to the Generalized Abstraction testnet, which was when we released the white paper, which will then have everything that we're talking about with like Abstraction 2.0. I think we just made an announcement of one of the projects kind of coming today, but that testnet will be opening up very, very soon. And I think, really once we're done there, once we break everything that we need to break and make sure everything's kind of done, then I'll see you on mainnet, right? And, dates are always hard in this industry, as you probably know. But I would definitely this year. I mean, not to give. I know that's not too specific, but if hopefully this testnet goes, hopefully we don't have to make any changes this testnet. We can hop in, tomorrow. But mainnet's coming right after testnet, and we're really excited for that.
Great. Well, Anthony, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today and enlightening me about XION and this.
Did I help? Is there anything that would have made it clearer earlier on? By the way, that's a question for you.
No, I think it's pretty clear. I guess like for me, it always becomes clearer when I see sort of tangible examples of applications and chains that are using this tech, and so like where it sits in the stack and how they integrate with it, and then what are the applications that sort of come out of that. But that will come with time as you guys roll out. Thanks again, and we'll catch you very soon.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun. Appreciate it.